This Toolbox Session is brought to you courtesy of Broadway Bank.
Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Jacob Cavazos. I manage community reinvestment at Broadway Bank, and I also have the pleasure of serving on the board of directors here at the South Texas Business Partnership. We are thrilled today to welcome you to the Toolbox, and we're privileged today to have Irene Canales here with us, who's the Senior Vice President and Business Security Act and Fraud Manager at Broadway Bank. And we're going to get into some fraud topics here, talk a little fraud with you, and ways that we can, as small business owners, guard our business, protect ourselves against fraud and the current scams that are out there. So Irene, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we kind of get into some of the meat and potatoes here, talk to us a little bit. How did you get into the fraud game? How did you get into this line of work?
I don't think you plan for this. It just kind of happens, one of those things. But, I'll say I started, banking years ago, probably back in 2003 timeframe. Started off kind of in the retail space, worked in personal banking, business banking, worked with a lot of small business owners. And then I got out of banking, which is kind of odd story to tell. But I got out of banking for a little while and actually started working with a small business. And in my time there, I was in a kind of financial and managerial space. I uncovered a fraud.
Okay.
And so it was pretty interesting, kind of how that came about. And it was through that experience that got me back into the banking world and got me into the fraud space.
Okay.
And so that's how it kind of started my journey into enterprise risk management.
Okay. So as you're working in this small business and you're uncovering a fraud and experiencing fraud, later on down the road, looking back, I guess if you don't mind kind of getting into maybe the high points of what happened, could that business have done anything from the beginning to kind of protect themselves, or lessons learned later on, say, shoot, we missed that, or here's a gap here that could have been filled, or
Absolutely. I mean, it's always hindsight 2020,
right?
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to say things that you could have done, then. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we look back at that and there's a lot of lessons learned. I would say, one of those lessons is always making sure that you have a dual control on a lot of the scenarios that are going on, especially anyone that's touching the financial space. Making sure that there's, two parties that are looking at things at all times. And then also making sure that you're reconciling frequently, right? If there's discrepancies in reconciliation, that those are addressed timely. And then just looking for overall red flags of situations, people who maybe are presenting themselves in a manner that is inconsistent with, what we know to be their normal, their normal income level. People who are secretive, or who have lots of control over certain scenarios. Afraid to take time away because of what could be uncovered, kind of thing. And then also just making sure that you have frequent audits and maybe even mock audits for certain scenarios. Those are the things that I think would have contained it had those been in place prior.
That's interesting, because I feel like we hear a lot about, or a common story of, it's the person at the front desk that checks the mail and has access to the checkbook and and somehow is driving this brand new car all of a sudden, and she never takes vacation because she needs to be, so it's or he or she. I feel like we hear that kind of a story a lot, especially with the small business that maybe have limited capacity or limited staff. So you're kind of saying, hey, have all these different checkpoints and make sure that multiple people are looking at the books, multiple people are looking at the mail, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, one of the things that gets even more interesting about this story is that it involved Broadway Bank. Which is very interesting, because little did I know I'd be managing their fraud unit several years later. But it involved, Broadway and another partner bank here locally. And, as we look at that, I think one of the very first interactions that I had as a manager was contacting my financial institution, and that engagement that I had with them helped uncover a lot of what we were looking for.
Interesting. So then I guess fast forward now you're managing the fraud department at Broadway. So kind of in your day to day, what are the kinds of things you're coming across and seeing, small business wise, that fraud that's out there that folks are falling victim to, or or that we're uncovering on the back end, or they may be uncovering on the front end, like in your story earlier? What are different types of things that are out there?
There's a lot of them. I would say some of the big hot topics right now are SBA fraud,
Sure,
right? So
yeah.
a lot of people, they needed help during the pandemic. Luckily, there was a lot of opportunity for that assistance. However, unfortunately, during these vulnerable times, there are also a lot of people who want to take advantage
Sure.
of these opportunities. And unfortunately, we saw a lot of that at Broadway, and a lot of our peer banks saw that as well. And so, what we were seeing were, businesses themselves who were being, their information being used to obtain these loans. We were seeing individuals, consumers' information that was being utilized to obtain these types of loans. And so it was a very unfortunate situation. Unfortunately, we had to act quickly to be able to stop some of this fraud that was going on. But really, looking back at that as well, making sure that your information is protected, that you know what to report, right? So the SBA has tons of resources out there that it's available on their website to report the fraud. They're always staying on top of trends and making sure that if there's trends going on there, they're putting that information so that people can inform themselves with what's going on. And so making sure that they're reporting it, right, if something happens.
And there's a time frame, right? A lot of times some folks don't know that. Like you need to review your stuff and report by, you have a certain window right there, right?
Right. And when it comes to banking, yes, so you always want to make sure that you understand, the limits of the banking relationship, right? So you look at your terms of agreement when you establish that banking relationship. And most banks are going to say that you have a 30 to 60-day time frame to report discrepancies, right? So when your statement cuts, you want to make sure that you're looking at that activity timely and reporting anything that would be of concern, right? And so making sure that you're following that reporting time frame so that you're not held liable for any fraud that you're able to find.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, you got a certain amount of time to let someone know, let your financial institution know that, hey, this doesn't look right to me. I remember having, when I worked as a banker, having someone come into me, they only looked at their bank statements at tax time, and so then found like this year's worth of discrepancies on there. It's like, oh, well, we can look at these, but
right.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
And another thing too is the unemployment fraud. I know we talk
Sure.
about the small business and how they were impacted, but unemployment fraud as well was very large. So a lot of consumers, small business owners, were all impacted by that. So just making sure that again, reporting is so important.
Yeah.
Making sure that you know what to report. Getting with the unemployment department, making sure they're notified, SBA's notified. Putting protections on credit bureaus.
Yeah.
So notifying the 3 credit bureaus, making sure that you have credit freezes if necessary.
Right.
Things of that nature.
Yeah. And are there things that a small business owner should expect when they report something like this? Is there a process, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think it all depends on the level of fraud, that you've experienced. Sometimes things take more time than others.
Sure.
And sure, you can expect, number one, you want to try to file online when possible. It does help speed things up. And a lot of agencies have offered online reporting, so I think that's important. And sure, somebody will typically be in contact with you. But again, utilizing your bank as a resource, right? We're there to help guide you. If you have questions about how you should protect yourself, or you've been victim of something like this, your bank can be a great resource for you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we talked about kind of the SBA scams. Anything else that you're seeing in that space? And SBA kind of falls into the PPP space too. But what else do you come across frequently?
Yeah. So I would say a big one that we see in the industry is something that is called business email compromise. It's BEC fraud, and that's pretty large. I think a lot of individuals and banks as well have taken large losses.
Yeah, what is it? I mean, we hear a lot. I feel like we hear a lot about that, but what does that look like from a small business perspective?
Yeah. So basically what's happening is fraudsters are compromising someone's email account,
Okay.
right? So you think about a small business, you want to think about, the owner or someone of high importance within that organization, right? Could be your CFO, could be your CEO, someone along those lines. And what they're doing is they're taking over their email account unbeknownst to that individual. And then what they're doing is typically before they're going to act on the fraud, they're going to investigate the email first, right? So if they see emails from Jacob Cavazos at Broadway, they're like, okay, I know that you know Jacob Cavazos at Broadway, or that you have these interactions with this banking relationship, or other financial relationships. And then what they do is they prey on that knowledge, right? And they'll create an email and they'll send it to this trusted party who normally receives emails from this individual.
Right.
And usually it's a request, right? Fairly large dollar amount request.
Right.
Or they want to change something, right? So I want to change my payroll, or I want to change, so I want to redirect where my payroll's going, or I want to send a large dollar wire, or I need to create a new vendor and quickly send out this large item that needs to go out, right? So very quickly, I can't talk right now.
Right.
I'm out of town. I'm in a meeting. Something's going to prevent you from being able to contact me. And so, and this is quick, right? It's urgent. It always is. And so that's the nature of what BEC fraud is this trusted group. And so a lot of financial institutions are very keen to this, right? And so we have controls in place to monitor for that and to ensure that, again, same thing, that there's a dual control effort, making sure that we're contacting that client back regardless of the fact that they just told us that they're not going to be available, making sure that we have that interaction and that interaction is validated, right, before we take action on it. And so, but I will tell you that there's been a lot of losses with BEC fraud, unfortunately.
Believe it, because they're preying then on the trust that you have from employee to employee and the system that it's set up.
Right.
So and we have ways, like you mentioned, to protect on the back end, on the bank end of catching these things. On the front end, from the business owner's perspective, what could they? I know you're talking about like they're preying on the necessity of the request, right? Hurry, and the relationship. Are there things that a small business can do on the front end to try and guard against that, be the first line of defense against it?
Absolutely. I mean, and I don't want to get into too much of a technical conversation, but generally speaking, what I would say is that, be careful who has access to your email. Always be careful about what you're clicking on. Be careful about using unsecured networks, things of that nature. I mean, that's just, I think, general, right? Yeah,
that makes sense.
The basics, right? Making sure you're protected in that realm. And then I think the other part of that is, again, having that open communication with your bank to say, this is something I would never do, right? Or maybe incorporating a password to say, if I'm doing something and it's over this dollar amount, or if I'm doing something in general and I'm doing it over the phone, or I'm doing it via channels such as email communication, or I'm texting you or something along those lines, if that's an acceptable path to interact, then what is an additional safeguard that I can have in place, like a password or something like that only you would know? And if I don't give you that, then that's a stopgap, right? So just thinking about things like that, getting creative with ways that you can do that. And again, having that ongoing relationship is so critical, because they should know what your voice sounds like. They should know what your normal interactions are. And a lot of the fraud that financial institutions can uncover are sometimes just the way it was written, or the way somebody said something, and they would say, our client would never say it like that, right? She doesn't usually say those types of things. And so those are sometimes some red flags that we can pick up on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess the scary part is, some of this information is readily available. Like, the CEO of the business is probably on the website, because
that's right. Everybody's on LinkedIn nowadays.
Exactly. I can see who works at XYZ company. But, so that does make a lot of sense that information, or that kind of scam happens, because that information is kind of readily available out there.
Right.
So I know we talked about this before, but and it's always surprising to me when you talk about it, because I think, check fraud. I think I don't write a lot of checks anymore, but that's something that we see a lot of, right? It
is. Check fraud is alive and well, my friends. It is alive and well. I know it sounds like one of those things like, why are people still writing checks? It's still there. And you think we've gotten past this by now, but we have not. And, we see a lot of business owners, and I'll tell you kind of the top things that I see regularly are especially for small business, right? Especially for small business.
Yeah.
People who still write payroll checks to their employees, and they're giving them in not just a check form, but a check form drawn off their financial institution. So that's kind of the key thing, right? Because there's a lot of third-party companies out there that can offer a payroll service. And if you use that payroll service, the information that's provided on that check is concealed or is a third-party information, right? So if something's compromised, it's that third party, right? So that little bit of transfer of liability. But
so
if you're doing
maybe a way to safeguard too,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely, right? So if you're using your own financial institution's information, the information at that bottom of the check, very easily duplicated, right? And so we all trust our employees, right? And sometimes it's not the employee themselves. I mean, we do see that, we do see the employees themselves, unfortunately, or a disgruntled employee or a former employee. I mean, those things happen, right? That are either doing it themselves or sharing the information so that it can be done, right? So those things happen. But another thing is also thinking about your vendors, right? Your third-party vendors. So you're paying suppliers, and if you're paying them in a check, there's probably some risk involved in that interaction, right? So thinking about other ways that you can conduct your business, thinking about safeguards, banks have safeguards in place.
I was gonna say there's safeguards out there that exist that banks offer. What does that look like for a small business?
I would say your Treasury Solutions team is probably the best team to get in contact with, and obviously your banker, your primary banker is going to be a great liaison for you. And there are certain products and services out there like Positive Pay. Right?
Yeah. What is it? I hear that term all the time. What does that look like? Was it?
So Positive Pay was created, to look specifically for check activity. So what it does is it allows the business owner to say, here's the checks that I wrote, here's the people it should go to, here's how much it should be for, right? So if it's not one of those things,
it's not getting paid.
It shouldn't go through, right? Yeah. And so it kind of alerts the financial institution to say, hey, this doesn't jive with what they told us should be coming through. But things have progressed, right? And so now you can actually use that for ACH transactions as well. It moves into that space as well. And there's probably a slew of other things that you can use it for, but those are kind of the top things that we've seen it used for. And it has been a wonderful safeguard for individuals who have become victim of check and ACH fraud. Yeah,
that's really interesting. And so thankful that product is out there to kind of help small businesses, operate on both the check and the ACH side. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Anything else that you see on the small business side? Or I know, we talked about a little bit, as much as we're here to talk about small business, it's individuals that are running these small businesses or consuming these small businesses. And so, individual consumer fraud kind of can seep its way in there and play a factor in a business's life, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, consumer fraud is on the rise. It's not going anywhere. Our numbers continue to increase. And you're right, we're all consumers. I know we focus a lot on small business and rightfully so, right? Because I think, there is a lot of research that's been done to show that, small business owners are definitely more likely to be victims of fraud compared to their larger counterparts, right? And so we know that to be the case. But when we really think, take a step back and think about it, we're all consumers in this. I'm a consumer, you're a consumer, the owners are consumers, their employees are consumers, right? And so being impacted by fraud at any stage, at any level, is difficult to go through. Some of the things that we see, lots of romance scams out there, and I know those things are out there, but it's social media, right? We're in a digital space now. Everybody's on social media. My parents are on social media. My grandparents are on social media. It's growing. That's the direction we're headed. And unfortunately, as great as it is, right? We always say technology is great until it's not anymore. It's so true. Yeah. Because I feel like, we're moving into this space and we tend to want to, I think just as people, we want to think that there's good in people out there. There's a lot of bad in people out there. There's a lot of people that just their full-time job is to commit fraud.
Yeah.
And they look for vulnerabilities in order to do that, right? And so when we think about fraud that's impacting the consumer space, romance is one of them. Elder fraud is a big one.
Yeah.
So we all have parents, grandparents that are impacted by that. Receiving phone calls about we call it the grandparent scheme, right? So they may call and say, "Hey, it's your grandson Jacob. I'm in jail and I need you to send me a bunch of gift cards because they won't take it in any other fashion." It sounds hilarious.
Yeah.
This is a true story. This actually happened to my own grandfather.
Wow.
And he called me and said, "Did you know your brother was in jail?" And it's like, he's not in jail. So these things happen, and it's comical, right?
Yeah.
It's comical to think about it until you're in that space.
Sure, they prey on that panic, right?
That's right. That's right. They prey on that, and so we have to do a better job of educating. I think that sitting down and having these types of conversations is kind of step one.
Yeah.
Making sure that we're talking about these things.
Yeah.
It's nothing to be embarrassed about if it's ever happened to you. It's happened to all of us at some point. I think there's not one person that's probably listening to this that could think back, "Gosh, I've never been victim of fraud. I've never been scammed. No one's ever done anything like that to me." It's happened to all of us. And if it hasn't happened to you, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Sure.
And so have these conversations. Don't feel ashamed to talk about these things with your families, with your banks.
Right.
That's what we're here for, is to provide that guidance. But again, thinking back to social media, we talked about SBA fraud. We talked about unemployment fraud. That was the number one channel that we saw as far as how they were able to get in touch with those consumers.
Interesting.
Right?
How did that work?
So it's like, they pretend to be legitimate loan companies.
Oh, okay.
They pretend to say, "Hey, if you need a loan, I can help you out." You have to think about, where people were, their mindset during that pandemic time frame, right? They need the assistance. And if you've never been in that situation where you really needed the money, it may be really hard for you to understand, right? Because, people either fall for these things, or maybe a small part of them knows that it's not legitimate, but it's out of desperation.
Right, sure.
Right? So we go back to, why do people commit fraud, right? Sometimes it's out of that desperation. And so I think, unfortunately, we saw a lot of that. Young individuals, again, that vulnerable community that fell for these types of scenarios and applied for these loans, received loan documentation back that wasn't even in their name, that maybe had some small business name in another state. Didn't question it because they just needed the money.
Right.
And when do I get my deposit? Right. And it wasn't until their bank kind of looked at it and said, "Since when do you own, XYZ company?" And started asking some questions that it really started to unravel. So again, a lot of that tailored back to that social media interaction. And same thing, with the romance scams, things of that nature. The way they're able to find out some of these relationships is by looking at social media, seeing, who you have publicly available. So, protect that information. Be careful, I think, of what you put out there for people to find. We talked earlier about, setting up passcodes or key pieces of information that you're the only one that would know. So if somebody could Google you or Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and they could find where you went to school, who your school mascot was, those are probably things you don't want to put on there, right? So we have to get more creative too about what is something that no one knows about me. Does it even have to be real? It just has to be something you remember. Right?
And I guess kind of bringing this full circle, that desperation piece that you talked about, that getting an individual taking advantage of in that case, that can bleed its way into a small business. If somebody's been taken advantage of and then out of necessity is trying to look for other ways, to recoup some of that money maybe, and that's, maybe that bleeds into a small business fraud situation if that person works there. So you can kind of see how it could
It's
progress.
a domino effect. It's a domino effect. There is no such thing as victimless crime. We hear that a lot. I've had fraudsters tell me that. Well, that's why you have insurance, or, no one was hurt, right? But you don't think about the fact that as consumers, we all pay the price. We're all paying the price in that small business owner who had to increase their prices because they were just victimized, right? And then same thing with insurance fraud, or all of these different. We could go on for days about the different categories, but every industry is impacted, and as consumers, we're impacted. So there is no such thing as a victimless crime, So for those that say that, it's just not true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from the outside looking in, I always thought you had a cool job because you're tracking down bad guys all day long.
It's the worst job. It's the worst job, Jacob. We talked about this earlier.
I know. So, but yeah, the reality of it is, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of trying to safeguard customers and the bank as well. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah. No, it's great. No, it really is. I say it's the worst job. It really is the best job. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough because you have to have a lot of tough conversations. We're always in a regulatory space, right? So a lot of what we do is heavily scrutinized. Especially on the BSA side. But when it comes to fraud, the way we talk about it at Broadway, is it's everybody's responsibility. It's not Irene's responsibility. Right. It's everybody's responsibility. And although
you're just one of the lines of defense, right?
Right. That's right. That's right. We just help to direct the program, but but everybody has to be involved, and that's why conversations like these are so critical to talk to our consumer base and let them know what things are going on and, what can I do if I want to talk about that more? Who can I contact?
So, I mean, are there any other tips or things that you want to offer? Maybe a small business owner who's watching or all of us are, like you said, all of us are consumers. Any things, rules of thumb, tricks of the trade?
That we're being filmed.
I know, right? That's the goal. But anything that you want to as a leave behind or resource or anything like that folks could take with them or latch on to?
Definitely. The biggest thing I can say is make sure that you have the right relationship with your bank, right? We're a resource for you, and if you don't feel like you have that right fit, contact us. We'll help you find that right fit. And there's a right fit for everyone. And make sure that you're not just thinking about your financial institution as the place you go when you need a new car, right? Or the place you go when you want to borrow money. Because sometimes that we get into that rut, right? We're not going to have that interaction. And I remember, I think back to my banking career days, I would always try to have these touch points, like let's talk every quarter, let's talk every 6 months, let's make sure that we're seeing what's going on, right? And those interactions were not just about what can I sell you today? Do you need a credit card, right? Because that's not what the banking relationship is supposed to be. The banking relationship is about being a liaison for all financial responsibility. And part of that responsibility is managing fraud, right? And making sure that we're keeping you informed of what are we seeing out there, And one thing that we didn't talk about that I think is, just another critical piece. And we're talking about this banking relationship and how important that is, and thinking beyond, just products and services. There's been a lot of spoofed call scenarios going on. And so be cautious of the phone numbers that are coming through. We're all using cell phones, right? I mean, I don't think anyone has a home phone anymore. Maybe my grandparents. I think my grandparents still have a home phone, and I'm pretty sure there may be a cord still attached to it.
It's the last one.
But other than that, we're all using cell phones. And so what we're finding is that, people are using third-party tools to spoof trusted phone numbers. It could be your bank. It could be your insurance company. It could be anyone.
I feel like I've heard that before with like law enforcement.
Right. It could be CPS Energy. I mean, it could be anyone. And so they're spoofing these numbers. They're making it seem like it's coming from a legitimate source. So you pick up your phone, you see a caller ID that you're familiar with. And you answer it, right? And the person on the other line is supposed to be that trusted party that was on your caller ID. And unfortunately, it's not. And sometimes, and these guys are good. I've listened to some of these calls, and they're pretending to be from your fraud department at your bank, and they're here to protect you, and they notice these charges, and they want to help you through it, right? And all they're going to need is your full card number, the last 3 numbers on the back, and the expiration date in order to do it. And so it sounds crazy, and again, it sounds comical to us when we sit back and we think about it, but these things are happening.
Yeah,
and
so leveraging those pieces of fear and anxiety.
Exactly. And again, they're planting that seed of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And so, just be on the lookout. So again, we talk about establishing that banking relationship, knowing that it's more than just what can you offer me today, having that regular open line of communication. But I'll tell you this, speaking from your bank, if you ever hang up on us and say, I just need to make sure you are who you say it, we're not going to be upset at you.
Yeah.
If you hang up and say, I just need to call you back because I just don't trust who you are.
Yeah, you call back using the number that you know.
That's right. You call that number back and you just say, hey, Jacob Cavazos called over here and he sounded very suspicious.
I don't know why I'm getting thrown on the
and I just need to be sure.
Yeah.
That's healthy, especially nowadays, and like I said, it doesn't matter who it is. If they're asking you for something critical, if they're pressuring you to give it to me now, kind of thing, don't get off the phone kind of thing. Those are the things to watch out for. Hang up. It's okay. Hang up. You can get back in touch with them. And if they were legitimate, I guarantee you they're not going to be upset that you did that.
Right.
So
that's a great, I feel like that's a great tip to leave on, because that's something really tangible that we all should know in everyday life. So Irene, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this and have this conversation. I think it's always timely to have a fraud prevention conversation, but never more so than in 2022. And so thank you so much for doing this. We want to thank Al and the team here at the partnership for giving us an opportunity to come and have a meaningful conversation about this. And we hope you'll join us again for more tips in the toolbox. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Take care.